For about the past 15 years, I've gotten to be what we call a Kidmin volunteer. Since I've started teaching college, I've stepped away from being a full-time children's minister and instead getting to be one of those beloved volunteers that show up on Sundays and Wednesdays to walk alongside kids. And so it was a few years ago now that the leadership of the children's ministry where I attend came to me and asked me if I would be willing to be a third grade small group leader. And I was like, absolutely. I love third grade. I love that age group, especially as they're figuring out so many things and able to have conversations. And I said, yeah, I'd love to do that. And then I remembered something. The previous year, I had been the large group teacher on Wednesday nights, and I had one of my students was the second grade small group leader, and she would constantly come to me and ask me for advice about how to handle this second grade group because there were a few kids that were a bit more of a challenge for her than a typical group. And all of a sudden, I realized those kids are going to be in third grade. And so as I thought about how do I prepare to teach this third grade group that I realize probably have a few more excitable kids in it than a typical group, well, how do I do that? And so one of the things I did from the very beginning was I remembered that this is an opportunity for discipleship. And also I need to be thinking about not just who they are now, but who they are in the future. I had one boy in particular that he just really had a hard time settling down. He was bouncing off the walls. He was often in movement, in constant movement. And I just kept praying every time I saw him and every time we ministered together. I just kept thinking, you know what? Someday you're going to be a student minister and I need to disciple you to be ready for that student ministry in the future. And if I kept that mindset, well, I could see in the future and not just the present. I think Jesus did the very same thing. In Jesus' ministry, we see how he managed a group of 12 followers. We see how he discipled them. And actually, through the life of Jesus, we can learn what we call classroom management skills. We can learn how should we approach a group of kids who've gathered together, either just a small group or a large group. How do we help to make sure that we've managed our rooms so that everyone can participate, everyone is safe, and that people are paying attention to the gospel? And so let's look at what Jesus did with the 12 and see how we could parallel that in our ministry. We begin by looking at the fact that Jesus set very clear expectations. Here's a couple of examples of that. In John chapter 13, when he's with his 12, he says, I have a new command for you. Love one another. That's an expectation. In Matthew chapter 7, he quotes what we call the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Jesus had very clear expectations. And one of the things that we could do to benefit our kids is to have clear expectations, so that they are not confused as to what am I supposed to do in this space at this time. What that means is a couple of things. First of all, the better we set up a rhythm of schedule, the better that they're going to be able to participate. Now, we can vary the methods within that, but if they know in this space, here's how I can behave, and in this space, here's the expectation, that will set them up for success. We don't want them guessing what it is that they should be doing. The second thing is to be consistent with those expectations. If you are overseeing a ministry, you need to clearly articulate that to all of your volunteers so that they can be sharing that with the kids. If you're a volunteer, make sure you're checking in with your ministry leader and asking, okay, how do I set those clear expectations? Some churches, they've created very specific kinds of guidelines that they use, and they remind the kids of that all of the time, and that have the leaders repeat it. And so it is just very clear to them, what is my expectation? And so how do I meet it? We also want to signal to kids when they're not meeting the expectation so that we can bring them back to what the expectation is. Maybe that is a signal like raising your hands and then slowly closing your hands. And once it's closed, their mouths need to be closed. Or maybe it's a callback, like you would say a word And then they need to call that back to you, and that helps them come to attention. But doing things that are very consistent and clear will help set your kids up for success and set up your classrooms to be managed very well. The second example that Jesus provides for us is he models his expectations with his own actions. Scripture records that Jesus says that it's not the student who is better than the teacher, but the student who is fully trained becomes like the teacher. We want our kids to become more and more like Jesus as we follow Jesus, and so we need to model those expectations. In Galatians, it talks about the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. Those are the things we need to be modeling for kids if we want them to exhibit those same expectations. And so what does modeling look like? Well, first of all, let me tell you what it doesn't look like. Don't do the things that you tell the kids they can't do. It's been several years ago, but one of the rules we had in our children's ministry was you don't sit on the tables, right? You sit in the chairs, not on the tables. And what did I do? I sat on a table. And did the kids call me out for it? Absolutely, they did. Were they right? They were, because I was not modeling the behavior that I expected from them. It's as simple as if you don't want the kids eating food in a certain place, don't you bring food into that certain place. If you want them to be listening to the large group lesson, guess who needs to be listening to the large group lesson? Yes, that's you. If you want them singing at the top of their lungs, you need to be joining them and singing at the top of their lungs. Model the expectations that you want for them. Other things that you could be doing that are very simple is arrive before your kids do. Get in that space, be ready for them, and be excited. Kids are going to follow your lead. And so if you model the expectations for them, they will come and meet you at that expectation. What we see when kids get distracted is often that they are bored. And so what you want to do is be prepared and with your excitement and with your preparation to model for them what it is that you would want them to do. We also see with Jesus that he loved well. I want you to love the kids that get to be part of your discipleship ministry. I want you to act like Christ, who said he came to serve and not to be served. I want you to serve those kids. And how we show that we love them is by, we reinforce the positive and we eliminate the negative, right? When you catch a kid doing the right thing, say so. Encourage them. Say the positive words over them. Catch them doing something good. Show them how they are representing, the life of Christ in their actions, and reinforce that. Encourage them in that way. Set goals for them and help them to achieve those. That demonstrates that you love them and that you see the best in them. But also, we need to eliminate the negative. And what I mean by that is this, is that we need to remove anything that might be a distraction for them. That might be that you need to rearrange your classroom so that they can't see outside, or you need to remove some things from the space so that they aren't distracted by it. Maybe it's noise, or maybe it's an activity they're going to do in the future. You need to hide that away. And so eliminating the negative can set them up for success. And also, in our love, we do need to, sometimes remind people of their consequences. And so when we do so with love. We remind them, and when we remind them of the consequence, we inspire them for what we do want. We remind them of how we want them to achieve. And so we encourage them in that. And then if they don't take the opportunity, we do need to follow through. Just like Jesus, we need to call out bad behavior, and we need to set them on the trajectory for the right behavior. And so if they haven't met the expectation, we need to follow through with the consequence. But what we see with Jesus is, because he loved them well, and also because he knew them well, they followed him well. Jesus knew his sheep. He knew well the 12 disciples. He said, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me." Jesus tells the story of the parable of the lost sheep, and he says that the shepherd goes out to find the one. And as leaders of kids, I want you to know your kids, know the sheep that are in that pen that you've been given, know their name and use it frequently. That is one of the most important things we can be doing, is to call them by their name, know how to spell it, know if they have a nickname, know about their lives, learn about them. Do they have siblings? Do they play sports? What kinds of activities do they enjoy? What's happening in their life? Learn about your kids. And the more you know about them, the more they will see that you care about them, and they're more willing to do the expectations that you've set for them. And so know your sheep. Contact them outside of class when it's appropriate. Send them birthday cards, and maybe gather a few of them for ice cream. Show up at their soccer games or their Little League baseball games or at their dance recitals. Know the sheep that have been put under your care. And also avoid saying things that are negative. Avoid using terms like troublemaker or things that are negative. Instead, put positive words over them. But also part of knowing them is knowing if there's some things that might be prohibiting their good behavior. For example, all of us are dealing with kids that are on the autism spectrum, and we need to know what are the challenges that they have on that spectrum. And we need to have information from their parents. We need to be communicating either through our children's leader or with the parents directly. How can we best meet your kids' needs? Do they need to be in a quieter space, or do they need less lighting, or they need a certain kind of care? We also have kids that have been diagnosed with other things, such as ADHD. We need to know how to best minister to them. The better that we know them, the better that they will be able to meet the expectation, and we'll be able to partner with parents in discipling those kids. We also need to know if something's going on at home, not inappropriately, not pressing in where we don't belong, but rather if they've lost a loved one recently, if their family is going through a struggle, how can we hear that well and minister to them? By knowing those things, we recognize that maybe there are certain days that, well, their behavior just probably isn't going to be as good as normal because things aren't normal in their life. And so the more we know them, the more we can minister to them. Jesus also corrected. He set the example, and he set a correction in place. Remember the life of Peter, for example? I mean, how often did Jesus have to redirect Peter? Peter is on the Mount of Transfiguration. He's like, let's set up some tents and we'll worship you here. And Jesus had to correct his understanding. Peter walks out on water, and as he does so, he gets distracted by the winds and the waves. And Peter, oh, you of little faith. Peter, who says, I will never deny you. And then Jesus restores him after the resurrection through his loving conversation. So we recognize that, well, from time to time, kids are going to misbehave. They're not going to meet our expectations. So how do we correct them? How do we rebuke them? How do we do that lovingly? Well, here's some guidelines for you. First of all, eye contact. Catching a kid's eyes, sometimes all they need to recognize, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and I need to redirect my behavior. But if that doesn't work, sometimes just moving towards them works. I've, walked behind a group of kids, and all of a sudden they've straightened up because they've realized, oh, I'm not listening or I'm not participating. And I've not had to say a word. Just my presence is all they needed. Sometimes I've had to say their name lovingly, or maybe ask them a question just to draw them into the conversation. And so that helps redirect their behavior. Sometimes if maybe they're not paying attention to you or not listening to you, gently touching them on the shoulder is an appropriate way to just get their attention and maybe help redirect their behavior. But here is the thing. Sometimes they need to be moved. I had a group of kids years ago that when they came into kids worship, they just knew they were not allowed to sit next to each other because, their behavior just never worked out well when they did. And so sometimes it's as simple as moving a couple of chairs over, moving them to a new spot in the room. Now, we also need to recognize that there are times where kids are completely out of control, that they have done something that is inappropriate, that they have harmed someone else, or they are outside of the ability to be controlled. And in those situations, we may need to remove them from the room, or in some really difficult situations, we need to maybe remove all the kids from the space and allow them to have the space on their own. In those kinds of situations, make sure that you're communicating clearly with your children's ministry leaders and with the parents about how to handle that kind of situation. But most of our classroom management problems are going to be dealt with very simple redirection, like eye contact, maybe a spoken word, or even just our presence near them. And that will help them pay attention and move in the direction that they're supposed to be moving. The sixth thing that Jesus did for his disciples that we can do for our kids is he prayed for them. He prayed with them. He prayed over them. Before he appointed the 12 disciples, he went up on a mountaintop and he prayed. He prayed for them as they went through their ministry. He prayed for them when he needed to chastise them. He prayed over them in the upper room as he was about to leave them. He prayed for them. And I'd encourage you to pray with your kids and over your kids. When we pray for those kids, we pray for them by name. We remember who they are and how we are part of their discipleship. And we maybe soften our hearts towards those that are harder to love. We are encouraged about those that we can help move towards Jesus. But also, we are reminded that we are partnering with God in all of this work. And though we want to do our best to keep our classrooms in a space that everyone is moving in the same direction and that kids are listening and hearing the gospel, that doesn't always happen. And so these are some of the things that we can do to set up our kids for success and our classrooms for success. Remember that third grade boy I told you about at the beginning of this video? Well, at the end of the year, after I continued to pray over him, I see your future. I see that you will be going into the student ministry. I see that this energy is going to be focused in that way. Well, at the end of the year, the children's ministry staff had the kids write thank you notes to their small group leaders. And here is what the note said that he sent to me. He said this: "Thanks for being a kind teacher, even when I don't make it very easy." Well, that was true. He didn't always make it very easy, but I'm really hoping that someday I see him here as a student at Ozark Christian College, because God, you never know what God might do in the discipleship of these kids.